I'd love it if you could kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thank you. So first, I want to thank you for having me on. This is super cool. It's nice, and the entire way that you have it set up is super easy. What's the app that you use for that? It's really cool.
It's called Calendly. Like someone signs up and everything gets automatically sent out, like follow-up emails, confirmation emails, questions, everything.
It's the future. It's so cool. So my name is John Caspian. John Caspian Media. I started off in actually, let's see, I'm 32 now, and about 10 years ago. Yeah, I actually started off on cruise ships as a performer. So
Oh,
doing
wow.
singing and dancing on there. I have a degree in dance. And that's automatically puts you in an artistic mindset, right? Creativity. You're always doing creative, fun stuff and dance performances and singing and all that. So after I finished up on ships around 2015, I said, what's something else that I can do creatively that can utilize the same creativity of the physicality and the understanding of lines and all that stuff. And first thing that hit me was photography. So a fortuitous day in February of 2015, it was snowing in Atlanta, Georgia, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
And I was filming it with like this little camera that I got on the ships, right? And I was walking along and I decided to stop into a hot dog shop. And this local professional photographer was there with his wife. And he started talking to me about the equipment that I had. And he's like, what do you have? What's the camera you got there? And I didn't barely know about it. I didn't know the settings and all this stuff. I was interested in it overall, but he started talking to me about, hey, do you want to learn more about it? Like how to use lights and how to use all the equipment and stuff like that. I said, yeah, that'd be great. Okay. So he took me under his wing, and over the next year and a half or so, I just started learning all about how do you pose people? How do you do lights? What's the physicality of photography? What are all the elements of lighting and composition and all this stuff? And that, of course, after a time, you're like, well, can I apply this to video? And he said, why not? Go ahead and do it. And that's when I started saying, well, if I start doing videography, I can make really fun commercials and videos and ads and stuff like that. A couple of years later, here we are. We're making fun, like really cool content for either tabletop games or businesses or really anyone that needs to advertise what they do.
That's really awesome. Like it's kind of serendipitous.
Yep.
That's the word, right? Where how you like kind of were stumbling upon this guy who just happened to know all this thing about video, and you're just kind of like out there just filming already. Right? And now look here where you are right now.
And he didn't even go to that area that often, which is the funny part. He happened to be there that day, scouting out a location for a photo shoot that he was doing. And his name's Jerry King, super good photographer in Atlanta. So if anyone's in that area and you need like headshots, stuff like that, check him out. Jerry King, really cool.
Wow, that's again really amazing how like things just happen. It just seems like they're just falling into place, right? One block at a time or like one thing at a time.
I always
So
say that I'm like success adjacent, like I'm nearby when other successful people are doing stuff. I'm like, hey, I'm over here.
you just bask in the aura, then you kind of like step into the
Uh-huh.
limelight too.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about videos, right? Let's hear people who are listening, who are tuning in, will be interested in about, Kickstarter videos, like making sure that they're able to get the word out about their game in this medium, this moving medium, right? Like there's so much to talk about when it comes to video. Like where do you usually start when someone has an idea and approaches you about, making a video?
Great question. So let's say that anyone watching this is in the process of development, and they're at anywhere from they've got the basic game. Maybe they don't have all of their art elements in place, or maybe they have some other facet that they're looking to hammer in before they get into the content creation. One of the things that I ask, and I want to make sure is the game ready? Like, can I show off the game? And that's one that I think that everyone has to ask is the first thing before you involve your content creators, whether they be photographers or videographers or even your copywriters. If you bring in copywriters at all, you want to make sure that the game is ready to play, so that if you have either CG, like you have someone doing 3D artwork for it, or if someone like me, I prefer the actual real space. I want to make sure that you have your gameplay elements, your cards, dice, meeple, whatever. If you have miniatures, that you have those either painted or at least done up, the prototypes, because if you have that all in place, then that's just something that's what the audience wants to see, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people, before they get the prototypes done, you can do the 3D thing where you're doing 3D assets, or they'll mock them up in basically a fake space, right? And everyone's seen the videos; they look awesome. And actually, there's a guy in the group that you made that's doing really cool work with that, like a lot of cool effects that make it look almost realistic, which is awesome. That's the number one thing you have to think about is it ready to where when I go to them, I can just give them the assets and then the video can be created. That's number one thing.
A lot of people who, want to launch on Kickstarter don't have like the final thing. What is ready? And like, how do you know if you're ready for
Right,
video?
right. So it's right before comfort, right? So if you're saying to yourself, the art assets look good, but maybe I need to spend a lot more time on them, or if I need to spend a little more time on them. So the conversations that I've had with folks is if they're so early in development that they're still like they present it to you. Like if you present it to me, right, and you say, yeah, but I still have a lot of work to do on it, then I don't think that's ready, right? If your feeling is, dude, it's almost there, we just need to go for it, then you're ready, right? Even if it makes you a little bit nervous, that's totally fine. Because at some point when I'm trying to get an asset from you, right? So assets are just the files, or it's an artwork or whatever. If it's PNG of a cutout of one of your characters, for instance, if I go to you and say, hey, this is basically what's presented to people as what's going to be in the final product. Is it close enough for you? That has to be true of mostly everything that you're doing. If there's a dice that you're going to change, or certain other things like small elements, it changes over time. It's fine because people expect that. But they're really looking for hammered in, like the idea, the design, what the gameplay is like. They want all of the main elements in place, and then having the basic design. Because if it changes after that, then they're going, well, what have I bought into, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great first step for everyone to know. Like what stage of doneness, and that I guess line between nervousness that this is not ready and excitement that it's going to be shown for the world. Like when you're on that cusp, it seems like you're ready for someone like John to pick it up and start creating content around it. And so here, after someone brings it up to you, they're like, okay, we're pretty ready with our artwork or our miniatures, our assets, whatever they have here. What's the next step to get from there to a final video?
Right. So then the overall process, it's a little time consuming on the front end and the back end. The middle part, which everyone thinks of as the most important part, is the filming. But really, before you even get to filming, you have to do all of the scripting. So the first, if you haven't heard this, you need to hear the first 1 to 3 seconds are the most important of any video or piece of content you create. But it's actually way faster than that. You have approximately 100 to 200 milliseconds in order for someone to judge whether or not they're going to keep looking at that thing, right? So even if they're looking at Kickstarter on the Kickstarter.com page already, the first thing you want to see is exactly what it is, and then switch around. So some of the greatest Kickstarters, like the Cool Mini or Not does, and a lot of these folks who are doing these incredible Kickstarters that I've seen lately, they hit you right away, right? So when you're thinking of what is the visual that encapsulates my game the most, give it an idea. Like people always say your 30-second elevator pitch. What's your quarter of a second visual pitch? That's something to think about. From there, the typical script goes into what is the game about in terms of what is the story, or what is the universe, or what are the characters? Why should I care about the game? And then you segue into the gameplay itself, maybe a little bit. So what does the hero of my game do? What does the character do? What do you as the player do? You go through the dungeon and you're looking to defeat the monsters to level up. And then you can sometimes, I think a lot of folks nowadays aren't doing this as much. You can give what are the rewards that you get when you back the campaign. But I'm seeing more of Kickstarter campaigns even getting rid of that part and shortening the videos even more to just play through the game and enjoy it with your friends and all that, end with a strong call to action, back the campaign, join with us in this journey, in this adventure. And then you can quickly scroll down and see what the rewards are, because people also want to see what they get when they purchase or they buy into the game.
Yeah, no, these are really great points. And again, if people are watching and they have questions, feel free to drop the questions in the chat box too, because they're popping up on our end and we'll be able to answer them in real time.
And very importantly for me, I don't consider myself an expert in anything ever. So I'm always asking questions, which to me is important, because one thing that any creator needs to know is this constant feedback. So when you're working with someone like me, or in my opinion, people who are way better than me, just like constant feedback is really important. You know, like I don't know anything and everything. So when I'm learning stuff, and as I'm learning new things and new tricks and all that stuff, it's really cool to like constantly say, hey, this doesn't feel as punchy as I want it to. Can we amp this up maybe somehow? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually one of the things that you were talking about earlier too really kind of struck a chord there. You were talking about how 1 to 3 seconds typically you have to catch someone's attention, but then you actually have that quarter of a millisecond or something, a really, really very short time to really capture someone's attention pretty much subconsciously too, with just the first screen that they see. How do you navigate that as someone who creates content? Like how do you make sure that that is the one, right?
So in marketing in general, you do what's called A/B testing. So if you were to, for your main Kickstarter page, for your main video that's on the Kickstarter.com, right? So people click on the link to your campaign and they see that first video. That version is basically you get a bunch of your friends and you say, hey, which of these first visuals is the strongest, right? They might know your game, they might not. If your mother says, oh, I like this one, put that into the camp of which of these versions is best. But when you're doing your advertising, say on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're advertising your game, that's where you can really easily A/B test. So you can have your video creator create versions that have just the different first 3 seconds. And then you can say, hey, we're going to pump $50 into each version and see which one performs the best. Then after you've done that, you can pump the rest into the really successful one.
Got it. No, that's a great point about A/B testing to like really know what works is you're literally testing one thing against the other and just changing that one part of it and seeing the results, like what is converting more, what's getting higher clicks, whatever you're trying to measure
Mm-hmm.
to kind of determine between A, B, or C even,
And
like
you'd be
what is doing
surprised
best.
at some of the really weird differences that make a large difference in terms of conversion rates and all that stuff. I remember reading a book recently on fonts. And so having a large serif font is 9% less likely to be clicked or viewed. Little stuff like that adds up overall, right?
Yeah.
So are the buttons that people click yellow or red? That can make a difference. Like just the differences and the different contrasts. So when you're even designing your game, you can go into are people looking at my page, and the images that the content creator like myself makes, are they small and viewed small on the Kickstarter page? And do they have really bold, hard to read font at a small level? It's all of these little questions that you can ask. But I
Yeah.
always say, of course, don't get too stuck into weeds. Do something, right? That's always more important.
Yeah.
Iteration is the most important, I think, to success.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my time working as like a product marketing manager in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we had this really long argument and conversation about the call to action button color on a
Right.
page, right? We were like,
Uh-huh.
okay, should this be red or should this be like a light green? And it was like a long conversation about just that one button on that one page. But at the end of the day, we just like, again, like you said, just put these two color buttons up against each other, ran some ad to it, and we found that okay, red got way more clicks than green with like the 2,000 people that came to the page. So this works great. So we went with
Mhm.
red, right?
Mhm. And that's super useful. So anytime you do advertising is the most important thing, because you don't want to spend $500 on an ad campaign when you haven't tested some simple stuff like that, right? So when I say simple stuff, you do a little research, like what do I change when I A/B test? That's when you Google that, you're going to find a lot of interesting articles and blog posts on that. If you were to ask a question to someone like me who's going to be running it for you, and you were to say, okay, we're going to do A/B testing. So what are you going to change in your A/B testing? If you Google that, then you're going to find some really cool stuff that starts percolating ideas in your brain.
Yeah, no, those are great points. So just like look at to see at what other people are doing so that you can kind of have ideas of what you can potentially test to optimize your own, landing page, videos, content, everything you're like putting out there on the internet.
Mm-hmm. I'm a firm
And
believer that the most important optimization is purpose and passion, really, right? So no matter how you communicate, as long as you are really interested and love what you do, what you're creating, then that shows no matter what. Because ultimately, when you say certain words, you can get so nitpicky with things, especially in marketing and advertisement. They paid a firm in Atlanta, I think, $500,000. It might have been way more, but I know at least $500,000 to come up with the ATL as the slogan for Atlanta. And people could have said, well, we've called this ourselves the ATL for 30 plus years. Why did a marketing firm have to take, $500,000 and do that? It was because they had to nitpick, right? So when you're
Yeah.
going on these big scales of these big multi-billion corporations, I can totally understand that. But for some of our projects, we're not looking for, $1 billion at a time. We're looking
Mhm.
for 10,000, 20, 40, $50,000 a time, right?
Yeah. And a lot of the times we kind of get, like you were talking about earlier too, we get bogged down in the details and forget that we just have to start making steps forward and start moving forward too towards our goal.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, just to kind of take a step back and just go back into the video part, because I know a lot of people are interested in about this part in particular too. We talked already about that first initial, thing to catch someone's attention, the A/B testing part, and now you talked about the scripting too, and about how you introduce the theme, you introduce your hero and the story and how it plays and things like that. There's always a lot of debate about how long a video should be, what the structure, what comes first, comes second, and things like that. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on like the length and also kind of the structure of a
Yeah.
video too. What is working now?
So it's interesting because at this point, it's hard for me to come at it from the consumer perspective. Anytime you get into something too deep, you can't see it from above, right? So if an onlooker is looking at someone scuba diving, they just can't see what's inside the water. So I feel like I'm the scuba diver in a sense, that I'm so underwater that I can't even tell that there's people seeing these things. So that's a weird analogy, I guess, but it's hard for me to look at a video and not do my video creator thing of, oh, interesting structure. They chose this at 10-second mark versus this at 8-second mark. What I would say is that when I'm structuring a video, I do it in segments. So
Okay.
I do the very first part, which is the splash, right? There's an intro splash of a lot of logo, you have a logo that pops up, but I mean the splash in terms of that first couple of seconds that people see. And then, like I said before, you have the segment of the explainer, the story. It's the epic wizard voice that explains all the things that happen, all that stuff, right? And then you have the what you do when you're playing the game. So with these segments, you can choose to switch them around in different ways, in the same way that you could choose to use a different font. So if you're going to the content creator like me and you're saying, well, we want to A/B test different segments, I can make the script fit different ways. So when we create the script and we say, okay, here's the words that the voice actor is going to say or the creator is going to say, we can actually just very quickly change around the different segments. The only thing you have to be able to do is get the call to action at the end. And if it segues and flows pretty well, switch certain things around. You could even, especially with some of the 3D stuff, you can switch around little stuff that segues into the end. And that, again, that's getting into the weeds of stuff. But I would say you can A/B test even what segments work. And the overall length being anywhere from seeing from a minute and a half to 3 or 4. And I've even seen some of the big campaigns doing like a 6-minute video. So it's really hard to say because some ones that are making millions of dollars are doing these huge epic 5 to 6 minute, it's almost
Short
like a short
movies.
film, right?
Yeah.
Super highly produced and wonderful stuff. I think the type of person that is interested in different types of games. So for my wife, for instance, she's really into things like Takenoko, Azul, Mysterium. I put those up on the wall. That's my wife's kind of side of things in terms of they're really easy to see. If she can see what it's like and she can enjoy the visuals and everything, she loves it. Whereas me, I get way more into the campaign style games, the ones where you really delve in and you play for 4, 6, 8 hours at a time and you can play often. So I love Gloomhaven, for instance, that kind of game. And so when I'm looking at Gloomhaven and I'm looking at a campaign I'm trying to back, I might be putting in several $100s. I really want more depth, right? I really want to see everything that I might be getting. Same thing where my wife, she could back a Kickstarter that it's only $50, and then at most you're going to pay maybe $100 or something, and she's just going to say, "Oh, it looks splashy and fun. I'll try it out." And that's not to say that I'm an expert in that. I think that's my gut feeling on it. Is that it's really depends on how much you you think that the person watching is going to invest in you, right? If you catch them and it's all about the story, then great. If you catch them and you're all about having really interesting gameplay, get more into the gameplay of it rather than getting into the story. That's the overall thoughts on that.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to kind of the audience you have for your game too, right? Just like you were saying, you want something that is, 4 to 6 hours long when you're actually playing it. So again, you're very more as an audience more invested in that development, the world development of like what is going to actually happen when you sit down for this like 4 to 6 hour session, right? And on the other hand, your wife as an audience is looking for something quick, fun, and enjoyable. And again, that translates to the assets that you actually create too, where the video becomes more quick, fun, and enjoyable too. So that really makes sense from like an audience perspective too.
And I, as a dancer, I'm all about energy. So when you approach a page, and then if it's a very serious, very dramatic, anything dungeon related tends to have that fantasy, feel to it, where it starts off a little bit darker and moodier. There's a lot of fire, maybe explosions, and then you have the swooping visions of the dungeon board as the models move across. Versus I've seen a lot of really successful, more fun games, right? And I say fun games like Azul and the kind of more casual games. They start off with people around a table, and then there's a lot of light in the room. So it doesn't feel like this kind of dark, mysterious place, which to me is really fun. I want to have a cool, moody room with like candle lights and all that stuff, right? So that can affect, like you're saying, that can affect the images that you create. So if you think Candy Crush, does Candy Crush look at all dark in any way, shape, or form? It's pure bubbles,
Yeah. Pure bubbles and jelly beans.
Oh my gosh. I remember that was first getting popular. I didn't even have a cell phone at that point. Everyone was on their cell phone playing Candy Crush. And all you could hear is the little bloop, 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 bloop. Immediately you knew a Candy Crush.
Yep. You're like, oh, down, someone's playing Candy Crush over there while they were supposed to be like studying or something.
Yep. Or they're on their phone while I'm going up to a reception desk and they're still on there.
Well, actually, we actually have a question for you here that I'm going to put on the screen here. Hopefully we can catch the whole thing.
Yeah.
Sometime. So they're asking about validating parts of the animation, animatic parts of the video, or is it better to visualize the whole thing and kind of?
I say it's best to go ahead and put a storyboard together. And if you put a piece of paper and you draw some rectangles, that's a storyboard. So the easiest way to explain, let me get a piece of paper here. There we go. Nope, that's an important piece of paper. Sorry.
Real-time demo here.
So anytime you have a piece of paper and you're looking to do a storyboard, I always explain this is the easiest way for people to do it. All you have to do is make some rectangles, right? And then you put the circle for the head, and then so your basic storyboard is this. And that's going to be white as heck because of the light. There we go. So your basic storyboard always starts off with a shot, right? And so when there's some technical stuff you can do, but anytime you're wanting to do a new angle or a new look or a new anything like that, you just draw a new box and that's it. So then when you're doing this, it's really good to use because you're telling yourself what is the most important thing of every shot. People get, especially in Hollywood, I've seen a lot of movies that are so obsessed with movement that you look at older movies and a lot of them just on a tripod. It's just a camera on a tripod with a beautifully created visual, and the composition and how everything is set up is incredible. And they have entire scenes where people are just slowly walking across this visual space. And that is impactful in ways that the movement doesn't necessarily get across, right? So always start off with the subject and then what's around them when you're doing anything like a storyboard. And again, don't overcomplicate the process. Just put a rectangle, put what you want on there. So in this case, if I were to start off with a board game, and for my wife, I would say, I want a fun, easy board game that I play in 15 minutes. Then the first thing that I might do is have the game being plopped down onto the table and instantly open up into there on the table, right? Something along the lines of, that's what I'm communicating as quickly as possible to the person. Bam, it's there on the table, let's play. And then you get into it from there, right? So then always think about that first thing that they're trying to get to. And then build out the whole thing from there. Why not? Because when you're doing this, you can always cut apart the piece of paper and then move the storyboard in different ways if you want to. It doesn't have to be, that's why I like paper so much. Sometimes you feel like when you're putting stuff onto a computer that it has that malleability, but honestly, cutting up a piece of paper and moving it around, super fun. And that way,
Yeah.
when you're talking with people, like if I were to talk to you about it, I would say, here it is. And you would say, well, what if you just move this one down here? A lot of cool feedback can come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I've been doing myself. Let me see. In the back here,
Yeah.
behind me, you can see that there's a lot of post-it notes. And that was actually like my annual planning. What I did was I wrote on different pieces of paper and it was like all over the whiteboard. And then I just started moving things and making like sense and crumbling different pieces up, throwing it away, writing more pieces, and just making it to like cohesive manner. And I'm sure the storyboarding is kind of that way too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's the big thing, is that when you put that frame down, or the piece of paper there, whatever the big thing you're trying to communicate, does that match with what you've been designing? Does that match with what you have been writing? Does it match with, are you, all these different questions become intuitive, because the last thing that you want is to have me spending hours upon hours talking with you and then asking you questions that you go, huh, I should have thought about that. Just ask the questions that come to your mind, right? Because I guarantee a lot of people they underthink because they think they're overthinking, right? You say, oh, I'm doing this thing, and then you end up undercomplicating it because you've overcomplicated it, or you think you've overcomplicated it, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So actually, it doesn't really make sense without the more context, but I would say just start talking and talking out loud, even if you're doing it by yourself. Like if I'm making this thing, I'm imagining what I'm saying in that frame. Find, oh, I want this board game to show that it's fast and fun. But what do people do when they're having fun? Well, they laugh, they smile, they talk with each other more. They're more active in their seats. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, what next? Do I show them? And then you just lead on questions like that. So that's a really useful tip if you want to really visualize, and that helps you even come up with keywords that is things that you want to touch upon. You don't necessarily have to say, but you could say boppy might be a keyword. And boppy is just all the people are really into it. So they're really energy wise, they're so excited about playing the game. Maybe when you're sitting there at a convention, right? Conventions in the future and convention not right, conventions right now, right? COVID. People playing your game. What if they're all like this all the time, and they're playing your game, and that's all the only emotion that they get is this? Well, most of the time, that's not how people get when they're playing games. They'll lean into it, right? They'll really try to absorb what they're playing, and then see what they're doing after the fact. You can literally portray all of those things in the video as well if you want to, and then find whatever the strongest one is and punch it in.
Love it, love it. And in this process of storyboarding and like writing out things, the main ideas, the main themes on each of these screens that they have on this paper,
Mm-hmm.
when did you come in, and how do they kind of communicate this with you? What happens in this process here?
Right. So then what I would do is we do basically an interview process where we go over a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here, just so that I can get a good picture of what the creator, what the designer needs from me. So usually I might just make the one Kickstarter video, or they might say, hey, we need photography as well. Or they say, oh, we need 3D art and 3D assets, which I don't do as much of. I do a lot more of the real world space stuff. So if it's putting a miniature on a table itself or flipping a card, I would actually do it myself or have that in real space, right? So we would talk through what is all of the logistical stuff that needs to be done, as well as go through a basic idea for a script. So we go over just like what we talked about here. So if you've been watching this whole time, these are a lot of the questions that I would be asking you. And I would basically want to get a picture of, when we're done with that 2-minute video, do you and all of your friends and, I don't know, 1 to 2% of people watching say, heck yes? Does that feeling happen where they say, this is definitely something that I would want to purchase or want to buy into? Then you know that you have all the right stuff in place. You can do all of the other stuff later. You can arrange all of the assets to be done. You can arrange all of the artwork if it needs to wait on it, right? The only thing is that it takes a little bit of time. So you want to give yourself 3 to 4 months before the Kickstarter goes live to create the video, because between scripting, that iterating it can be me writing it, telling you, you looking at it, getting back to me. That bounce back can be a couple of days. Then I iterate it again. I do some changes. Then I send it back to you. You look at it, take a day to think about it, send it back to me. That's a week, right? So then before you know it, just script writing can be a month. Then I have to actually prep all of the stuff for filming, whether it's having to rent equipment or having to get the actual physical stuff from you. Then you have to ship it to me, right? So all of that stuff takes time. Give yourself plenty of time beforehand, as much as possible, to start the process.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And it's very similar to like reaching out for reviewers or even previewers for a game too, right? A lot of people think that, hey, my Kickstarter's launching in a week. Let's just start finding someone to review my game. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. People book up, months in advance. People plan out months in advance, and very much like videos here too. Like you were saying, there's such a process to it that it can take quite a bit of time to kind of develop something that really is impactful for the
Right.
project.
I always like to say, if you think of photo shoots and models and stuff like that, it just looks like the model shows up and they're glorious and they're walking around, and it makes it look so easy. But what you don't factor in is the makeup artists, the designers, the people who are sewing perfect things on her left arm because her left arm looks a little bit bunched compared to what it should. And then you have the camera crew and then the different people bringing in 12 different lights to make sure that the one shot that they get looks magazine ready. So we don't really tend to factor in all of those extra things. We just think, oh, well, you're filming something and you're piecing together in Premiere Pro or Final Cut, but there's all of those little things, just like the overall marketing of a game is, right? There's so many little things that when you first look at it, you go, well, that seems pretty simple. And then you say the next question. And then once you start asking questions, that where it gets overwhelming in a sense. You're like, holy crap, there's so many things now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it seems like you've done a lot of videos in your time. You've done a lot of content creation, seen a lot of things, especially on Kickstarter too. Someone actually asked, like, what are your some of your all-time favorite or most influential Kickstarter videos that you can kind of tell us about, so people can go and have a look themselves too?
I think to me, I'm all about the mood that someone gets into when they finish a Kickstarter video, right? So I would say a lot of the cool mini or not stuff is absolutely just, if you don't know about any of that stuff, just watch them, right? They make millions of dollars because if you can break them down and use the storyboard. You can actually write out what they're doing on their videos, even their most recent ones, in a storyboard yourself, and you can copy it and you can see the elements that are involved, and you can see and just take a moment and you can rewatch it if you need to. What are they doing that's making it so compelling? It's not necessarily about a high production quality, although they do have that, but they're hitting on all of these psychological things. They're hitting on the cool factor. They're hitting on all these little things. You go, as a whole, dang, that's good. So instantly, cool mini or not stuff. And some of the Kickstarters that I've liked best, even going back years, have been non-game related. They've been some random things like rollers. And I mean, if you look up the most successful Kickstarters of all time, and they don't seem like a standard Kickstarter, right? They're really kind of goofy in some ways, because they say, if we're going to present something that's not terribly fun by itself, like a foam roller type deal, we're going to present, what's the potty poopy thing? Poopy potty?
Oh, the Squatty Potty.
Squatty potty. My
Yeah.
God, was that hilarious? I remember first seeing that and I said, who on earth, what were they taking that made them come up with these ideas in the scripts and everything? But they followed the exact same process. They said, well, it's not necessarily by itself something that you instantly go, yes, I'm in. But with a little bit of fun and humor and a little bit of creativity, just some time, right, taking with it, you can hit on some cool key points. So I would say that would be my answer for the Kickstarter stuff, is definitely all the cool mini or not stuff. And honestly, there's even some that haven't made a ton of money that I thought were just incredible. But off the top of my head, I'd have to I can't think of them right now, especially while we're here in an interview, but definitely any of the cool Minnie Mouse stuff for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really awesome. And if people want to kind of like reach out or learn more about you, follow your work, tap you and be like, "Hey, John, I want to work with you." Where do they go? Where do they find you?
Yeah, so we're redesigning the website for 2021 to basically to compensate for COVID, because there's a lot less of the in-person creation going on right now. So we're doing a lot of consultation, a lot of the stuff where you as a creator just you don't know some stuff. So we just talk and figure out, for instance, am I hitting the key market that I want to? Am I hitting all of the right people, my ideal client and all this stuff, right? Am I marketing the game, broadly speaking? Am I marketing the game to the type of person I want to? The questions that I'll help ask will just kind of get there. So you can like book a consultation, for instance, and go to johncaspian.com. You can email us john@johncaspian.com. Really simple. And then we can start having conversations, because right now with COVID, it's difficult in so many ways for me to do what I've always enjoyed, which is physical stuff, right? Because the most recent one I did back in October for Gaddis Gaming, we actually went there to Michigan, and even that had a lot of restrictions because we had to all have masks on, social distance. We couldn't have as many people in the play space. We wanted to have 25 people, playing the game in this one space. We were only allowed to have 4 or 5 people, right? So with that, I think the one thing right now is consultation, so that people can just talk to me, and we can figure out, hey, if I can help people right now get an idea of how they market their game, I think that would be really cool for me, versus just creating a video, which has been my thing previously in the past.
Yeah. No,
JohnCaspian.com. Yes.
yeah, this is a really great last question actually that I want to ask you too. Like how is video creation different now with COVID and which with this new way of how we're doing work? You mentioned that you used to like kind of go on set, have like sometimes have large sets, lots of people. What is it like now as a video creator, and how and working with people?
So what I've discovered most recently in this last couple of months, which, people talk about pivots during 2020 and how everyone's having to pivot, which I'm like, well, you should always be willing to pivot in business or whatever. So what I've had to do is realize that I've always strived to make more high quality content. What I'm actually realizing is I really just want to help people get better at producing their content, what they want to communicate. So, when I'm coaching someone, I've been a teacher for a long time. So, teaching dance and helping kids learn how to move, right? That's a big thing, and physicality and everything. I have always, I've always wanted to help people. And I think that's one of the things in 2021 that people will do more of, is like exactly what you're doing right now, which is more interviews, more discussions, more conversations. When I talk to business owners, like a dentist, which I talked to recently, I said, are you having conversations with your customers? And he said, all the time. I mean, I talk for hours and hours. I said, well, could you automate some of those conversations? Could you talk with your customers and say the same thing, make it entertaining because you're a funny guy, and then have them enjoy that without you spending hours talking to one person at a time? I think some of that is where some of the future video content overall is going to be. People like me, I have this fancy, $1,000 camera, which you say, oh, that just looks like a webcam maybe, but in the grand scheme of things, I could be recording this and then post this up onto a YouTube channel. That kind of interconnection and conversation, I think, is the future of what a lot of content creation is going to be. It's not going to be so much of getting a videographer to come in, make something look super splashy, and then being done. It's more like we create 12 pieces of content before, have a splashy video, create 12 pieces of content after, and then figure out which of those conversations leads to more pieces of content. And that just keeps on going and going and going.
Got it. Kind of that real time optimization in a way, right? You're producing, learning right away, and you have some backup stuff that's produced already, but then you're like, okay, maybe I can just create this and this and this additional because of this one learning from that
Yep.
first video that you rolled out.
And that's the cool thing about things like live streams, is you get, what are people asking for? What do they want, right? So when you're looking for those, designing your game, what are the conversations right now from customers? What's the complaints? What are they talking about? That's a really great piece of content for you. If people are complaining about delivery time on their Kickstarter because it's taking them 2 years to get a Kickstarter, well, how are we different from that? How are we going to do it in half a year? Then you have a conversation, and that conversation is the thing like a live stream or whatever, talking to your core audience. That goes under YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever. Those conversations, if you just keep on popping them out, it grows that, I like to say, grows the tree out. Those are all leaves on a tree that you build over time.
Yeah, I love that analogy too, where you're just kind of also, again, consistently kind of watering it and growing it and expanding it as time goes on too.
Because
All
that's
right.
that's the power of network. It's called the network effect. That's what it's all about. Each video, each piece of content that you create is a potential network for other pieces of content that you can create, and ultimately more business to become your way.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. I know a lot of people probably have, a ton of things they took away from this video, especially with that, storyboarding and like those tips about that too. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being on here.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, and everyone have a good one, and stay safe with COVID and all that.